Hi there. You are tuned into Harriet Lucas at Bugasiswe, where we have real talk about real life issues specifically around the reintegration of offenders back into society and the role that society plays with regards to that. I welcome you. In response to part of the discussions that was held recently in Parliament with the opening of Parliament, join me today as I dissect some of what was said by our president and also a request made by the police minister, Mr. Senzo Mchunu, who asked for
189 billion rand in funding for the police budget.
well, as an ex-offender myself, having paid my dues to society, the indiscrepancies existing within those approaches are nothing short of blatant disregard and outright misuse of state funds. The disregard I speak of refers to the statement by Mr. Ramaphosa expressing his intention to focus more on high-end technology to lessen or combat crime. My opinion on this is since his reign in Parliament as our president and even before then, the crime statistics in our country has done nothing but steadily increase, not just in number but also in severity. The constant upgrade or installation of high-end technology so far has done nothing to decrease these statistics. It may have lessened certain crimes in certain areas, but it has definitely increased them in other areas. There's a saying in prison that goes, "Die skelm is altyd een voor." And what that means in English is that a thief is always one step ahead. So no matter how high end or advanced the security or technology is, criminals will always find innovative ways of circumnavigating those strategies. If corruption in leadership was not such a prevailing trend here in South Africa, then maybe, yes, those interventions could have yielded its desired effects. But as things stand, criminals will always outsmart the law because of certain key players within the hierarchy of our criminal justice system who has no regards or respect for the law. So it is in this context that I speak of our president's blatant disregard, the stubborn pursuit of policies and strategies that has made no meaningful impact on the general issue of crime. Then, with regards to the request
Of Police Minister Senzo Mchunu's plea for 189 billion rand,
towards the police budget, guys, like really, no, 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 no. I'm not saying that the police should not get funding. I mean, it's evident when you walk into any police station in our country that it's in dire need of upgrading and also that an increase in the salaries of the police officers themselves will be a huge boost to their morale in general, considering the very important tasks that is entrusted to them.
but 189 billion.
The allocation of this money is very conspicuously distributed under subheadings such as visible policing, politicians' protection, etc. I can only imagine how much of it will be allocated towards the technological upgrade of weapons and arms. because I couldn't find any viable or concrete information about this on the internet. My question is this: why are these astronomical amounts made available for the combat of crime, and not even half of that made available for the research and elimination of the causes of crime, which includes early childhood development and education, poverty, joblessness, and mainly the issue of land, to mention but a few. I mean, one of the main areas for intervention is the Western Cape, with the gang violence going on there. If only 1 billion rand of that money was invested into those gang-infested communities in the form of skills training, youth development programs, self-sustainable workshops, and so forth, imagine what a big monumental change and impact that would have on the people living in those communities. To me, it seems as if our government really are not concerned with the most basic needs of our struggling communities. Their main and overall focus largely is centered around finance and technology, which to me, as one of the struggling South Africans, is an indication that our government is assuaging the greasy palms of a select few individuals who stand to benefit from these kinds of policies. Even with regards to the long queues at public service institutions, one of our new ministers also suggested the use of digitalization to alleviate this problem, meaning that the poorest of the poor will not have access to those services because they cannot afford a digital device, let alone maintain it. What this also means then, in effect, is that a person relying on the 350 Rand grant money, which in many poor households is their only means of income, will then have to save that money for a couple of months until they have enough money to buy the appropriate cell phone so that they can then be able to apply for an ID, an RDP house, etc. There are a couple of countries which we as South Africans can use as a benchmark towards measuring their low crime rate in relation to their unemployment rate. You will also find in those countries that land ownership constitutes more than 50% of their population. In South Africa, although home ownership constitutes 79.7% of the overall population, many of those houses that are often built on prime property, prime land, you'll find that those owners do not even live in South Africa. The legacy of unequal land distribution remains one of the biggest contributing factors towards social economic inequality and our ever increasing crime rate. Government chooses continually to ignore this incongruity. And when people such as Julius Malema and others speaks about it, the media is then used as a tool to highlight whatever the public may perceive as offensive or unacceptable behavior by such an individual, thereby conveniently redirecting the public's attention away from this very, very important issue in exchange for something totally irrelevant and inconsequential. If you look at those areas where crime is rife and disorder is at the end of the day, you will find that their living space and conditions are atrocious. Often people are squashed together like ants, forced to live in hostile-like environments. These legacies of apartheid still lingers today, 30 years after our so-called democracy. When people voted in 1994, it was in the hopes that those conditions would improve, but instead it has only worsened. Everywhere you look in South Africa, informal settlements are sprung up. And so far, the only intervention, or one of the main interventions on the part of the government, is to go in those areas and build communal public toilets on the outside. And not because they care, but because they cannot risk the possibility of contamination of the affluent neighborhoods that are often bordering these settlements. To give a person land is to restore that person's dignity and sense of compatriocy. How can you expect someone to be loyal to a flag that flaunts its opulence in the faces of its suffering citizens? So you may ask yourself how all of this fits in with the reintegration of offenders back into society. Well, it's got everything to do with the reintegration of offenders. Do you even know what the rate of recidivism is in our country? Do you know what that word means? No? Well, let me school you. Recidivism refers to the reoffending of ex-offenders. The rate of recidivism in South Africa stands at a staggering total of 86 to 94%. What that means in plain English is that up to 94% of criminals that comes from prison goes back into crime and find themselves back in prison again and again and again. South Africa has one of the highest recidivism rates in the entire world. So what does this say about our government and our criminal justice system? Do you understand what this implies for us as a country? This means that even as a first-time offender, chances are more likely that upon your release from prison, you would go straight back into reoffending. That is what it means. And why is that? Well, the answer can be found in the question I raised earlier, which is, why can't some of the billions in our state coffers not be directed towards the alleviation of the causes of crime rather than the acts of crime itself? A person with a house and a job and a purpose to wake up every day is less likely to involve themselves in criminal activities than a person who has no home, no income, and no prospects for a better future. Now, I want to just mention here, for all the naysayers who would be saying right now, oh, prisons are too relaxed and prisons should have stricter rules and overseers. Well, short of killing all the criminals in our country, what you are suggesting is that criminals be treated as less than animals. And with that type of treatment that you are suggesting, you expect those individuals to come out of prison and be respectful and law-abiding citizens. At this point, I refer you to Dr. Sandra Hoffman's book, which deals with many of these issues in more detail. Specifically, on this topic, you'll find more in chapter 4 on page 50. As I've mentioned in my previous video, I want to reiterate the importance of schooling yourself on these issues, so as to speak from an informed position as opposed to an ignorant point of view. You cannot make assumptions based solely on what you see and hear from the media. Do your research, and I can assure you that Dr. Hoffman's book is a very good starting point on this line of discussion. She's not just educated and highly qualified, but she has also dedicated a majority part of her life to, not just in time, but also in resources, her own resources, to this field of study. So please do yourself a favor and go and get yourself a copy of her book. And so it is my plea through this video that government invest more into the lives of struggling citizens, and also to provide ex-offenders with viable incentives to sustain themselves. Create places of employment or change policies around the hiring of ex-offenders in the workplace. Support initiatives that strives to lower the rate of recidivism in our country. Buying more guns and upgrading your gadgets is not going to lower our crime rate. Only the companies where you buy your guns and gadgets from will benefit from those initiatives. South Africa is crying for intervention. And any meaningful intervention is not going to happen by repeating the mistakes of the past. I understand why there is a cry for younger leadership, as our elders seem headstrong in their pursuit of old, outdated tactics of transformation. We seem to be stuck in a conundrum of self-destructive change which benefits only a select few. Unless we as a people wise up and stop being puppets in other people's plays, we will not reap any of the benefits we were expecting with the end of apartheid in this country. Our fight has shifted from white versus black to the greedy versus the needy. And on that note, we will wrap up our program today. I do trust that my speaking out will spark a change somewhere, somehow, where it comes to this very controversial issue of reintegration and the support structures that are in place for people released from prison. Thank you for tuning in, and remember to hit that subscribe icon if you haven't done so already. Please do leave a comment in the comment section, especially if you have views on how our government can lower our crime rate. And then lastly, don't forget to diarize the event taking place in Tembisa at the Rabasotho Community Hall on the 16th of October, which will be hosted by Mr. Solimanga, who you may know from his involvement with the Scheme GP Foundation. He is the founder and owner of the Second Try Foundation. And if you want to find out more about it, you can look him up on Facebook, Instagram, his information will be up on the screen. And the event is called A Celebration of Books and Authors, where there will be a wide variety of inspirational authors and speakers from all walks of life, from doctors to priests to the normal, ordinary citizens, and also ex-offenders. There will be entertainment and refreshments, and entrance is free, so bring the whole family and make it a day. I will also be there showcasing my book, which will be for sale at the event. So do come and have a meet and greet with me. Until next time, take care and stay informed.